So beyond personal opinion, what is it out there that dictates how much latitude senior leaders really have? And if you notice, the factors on the chart kind of parallel the resource-based view of the firm and the IO view of competitive advantage. So the first is the external controls. And a lot of that has to do with the type of industry that you're in. Do you have particularly aggressive competitors? Are there strong industry norms that you have little choice but to comply with? Is this a highly regulated industry such that there are certain ways that business must be done? The bottom point I want to put on there, though, is a very dangerous one. Uh, Be slow to conclude that there is no room for innovation. Perhaps there's not a lot of room for product innovation, but there may be a lot of room still for process innovation. Then you get to the personal factor about the individual. Different people have different skill sets. And in theory, you should be hiring a CEO that's high on all of these skill sets, but perhaps you don't. Are they one that can communicate well? Do they have the ability to form and articulate a vision? Do they have the willingness to work hard? Do they have the personal self-confidence to lead an organization through tumultuous times and the like? But in theory, you would pick someone high in all of those factors because that's who you'd want as your CEO. To the extent that they lack those, that's going to diminish the impact on the organization they have and on the latitude that they have. The organizational factors, though, are very powerful. And some of them are not what you would think they are. So size, you say, well, small is easier to control. You'll have more latitude in a small organization than in a large organization. Maybe, but maybe not. Likewise, age. The common thought is that older organizations are more hidebound and less likely to be changed versus young organizations. There is truth in that, but it's not an immutable law. So you may find some older organizations that have where the strategic leader has a lot more latitude than a young than a young company. The company culture in general is going to have a lot to do with all of that. Is it so strong that you can't change it, which may or may not be a good thing? Or is the culture central such that certain things are unchangeable, but around that core, lots of things are. So there are many factors in play. Resources, do you have the opportunity to make changes, or are you strapped in a turnaround situation where you're just trying to keep the lights on and the doors open on a daily basis? All of those are important. I think the last three on the chart are the ones that are really key. For example, past performance. If you were hired to turn around an organization, you can see that you would come in with a lot of latitude because we have poor past performance. What if you're hired to take over an organization where has been very strong past performance? Well, in that scenario, it's pretty hard to say, well, you know what, I'm going to come in and boom, we're going to blow this organization up because it's all wrong, because you have that strong past performance. If you think that's necessary, you're going to have to communicate that in a way to convince people that you're at a strategic inflection point and the fundamentals of the business have changed. Now, that's a really tricky thing to take a company like a Microsoft, like an Intel that has had tremendous past success and dramatically reshape it for the future. And then the board of directors, are you going to be given the latitude to do what you feel like you need to do, or does the board have you under quite a bit of control? And that bottom factor is I want to say it's called the shadow of the predecessor, often implemented through the board of directors. And that is the person that you replaced may no longer be the CEO, but they may still be around either as the chairman of the board or on the board in general, or just very vocal. You see this in the Microsoft CEO debate. How much room is the new CEO going to have, given that the founder, Bill Gates, and the past CEO, Steve Ballmer, are both going to be on the board of directors? And again, there's no givens in this. These are just factors to be considered. So this is one of those points where I wish the Air Force would have done a much better job preparing me. The first job I thought I had in the Air Force where I was strategic leader was when I was a squadron commander. Fortunately, I was a squadron commander in a very large organization with lots of squadrons, such that I had significant latitude from my bosses because they were busy dealing with other squadrons. They were just kind of overwhelmed by volume. Well, that was a great opportunity because you had more strategic latitude. And in the fighter squadron, I had my pilots who did the flying, and I had my maintenance personnel who fixed the airplanes, and I had tremendously talented officers in charge of both. And that led me to conclude, what do I do? because I've got this guy who gets mad when I get in his business, and this guy who gets mad when I get in his business. So what do? And the bullets on the slide are what you do. You design, you determine a direction. We've been talking about that throughout our discussion about strategy. You design the organization. Now, this is not just the wiring diagram, although the wiring diagram is important, as we're talking about in this section, final sections of the strategy class, but it's also about people. In that squadron commander job where I had those two key people that worked for me, I had a particular person I wanted to come in to run my pilots, as the previous person was getting ready to move on to another job, and I spent months lobbying to get the right guy into that job, and I eventually succeeded, and I was right. He was the right guy and did great things for me. And then it talks about the last point is nurturing a culture of excellence, innovation, just call it the right culture. Those are three powerful points that the strategic leader needs to do. You have a lot of activities that will fit in that, but in general, that's what you're doing. Another textbook, another fantastic textbook, breaks it down this way, not quite as simple as the 3 points, and I really like the simplicity of the 3 points, but I want you to see both where they line up and point out some subtle differences. In terms of managing the resources, that is both capital and human. And that's where a strategic leader will have the latitude to do that. And this could be a decision of, we need to develop these sorts of core capabilities. Then the organizational culture, ethics is a big part of it, excellence is a big part of it, but also this idea of an entrepreneurial culture, one that supports experimentation and change and innovation. And then the final point is this idea of the balanced scorecard. This actually, the balanced scorecard is raised much earlier in the textbook that we use, and I like the way it's discussed. We just didn't have much time to talk about it because there's so much going on throughout this course, so much material. So this is the idea that the strategic leader basically sets the parameters that factor into the into the balanced scorecard, and that's a very important function. And then lastly, on this idea of what do strategic leaders do, I wanted to talk about the Mintzberg article. I asked you to read this article. If you didn't, I encourage you to read it because A, it's a class, and B, it's going to form the basis for one of the potential questions on the last exam. This article is very old, quote unquote. It was published in the early 70s in the Harvard Business Review. The research was done in the late 1960s. This is something I desperately wish the Air Force would have had me read because it talks about in detail how it is that the strategic leader does those three major tasks. Even though he comes up, he looks at it as roles, and you could say, well, it's very different, but I think it aligns very well with the other things. What's interesting is we could talk about what's changed from this article, and clearly our usage of information technology and email and all those things has dramatically changed the environment. And you'll read some of the Mintzberg article and go, well, that's Mintzberg article, and go, that's very different now, and it is. But what's very surprising is how much is the same. So I think this is a fantastic article to read, absorb the different roles, to let you understand what it truly means to be a strategic leader. So I thought you were just going into work every day and making important decisions. No, not at all. Sometimes you're sitting in boring meetings. Sometimes you're, quote unquote, wasting time meeting with high-level dignitaries. Although those things plant the seeds for future success in many cases. So I encourage you to dive into this article and save it, because if you ever lead an organization, this is a great thing to go back and read. In the last clip, we're going to talk about the final leadership issue that's of near and dear interest to my heart, and that's the idea of integrity.